Hey, what's up, guys? I just wanted to do a simple card review with my first impressions of the cards before really, the big names who do these card reviews get back from BlizzCon, and you know, I like to watch them as much as anybody else, and I just want to get my raw impressions recorded down before any of their opinions sway me at all. And so yeah, I'm just gonna run through the cards real quick, give my impressions of them, and yeah, both for anyone who wants to enjoy listening to this review, and also I want to get it down so that I can look back and see how well I was good at judging the value of these cards before they got into play. Anyway, so the first card on the list is Anyfin Can Happen. 10-mana spell from Paladin. So 10 mana is kind of insane. Takes up your whole turn. Is dead in your hand all game until obviously turn 10 or later. And the first instinct is that this is for Murloc Paladin, right? However, I think that this is actually stronger in a mid-range Paladin that only runs Murloc Knight. Because throughout the course of the game, you'll play Murloc Knight, maybe 2 Murloc Knights by the time you'll get to be able to play this. And let's say you got 1, maybe 2 hero powers off of that. That means 1, 2, or 3 out of, or there's a high percentage of the Murlocs that have died are Murloc Knights, right? It's like 50% if all you get is the 1 hero power. And I assume that this card can summon the same card multiple times. There's no reason it shouldn't be able to. So if you have 1 Murloc Knight that you had to play on turn 4 for whatever reason, and it just died, you play this on 10, you get 7 Murloc Knights. Now, 10 mana, fill your board with 3/4s that if they live, might just win you the game with hero powers. That's potentially really strong. There is the downside of, obviously it's turn 10, you got to get there. But I think you can pull this off as a one-of in a mid-range pally with Murloc Knight, exclusively as it's only Murloc. Yeah, I think it could be a surprise one-of that a mid-range pally could run. There's the other 4-drop for pally that might just make Murloc Knight not worth it anymore. A lot of people already have cut Murloc Knight from mid-range Paladin, and with the new one, maybe it's just not worth putting in Murloc Knight to make this card work. But the odds, even if you're only running the 2 Murloc Knights, the odds of drawing Murloc Knight by the time you play this card are super high, because it's got to be over 10 turns. You've drawn at least your starting hand plus an additional 10, so there's really high chance that will just be able to work and summon 4 Murloc Knights and 3 whatever spawned out of them on average is pretty solid. And you could even, assuming you can survive, once again, you could even replace just like a lay on hands and just use this as sort of like your recovery tool. After you start to run out of stuff, suddenly you just have a whole board with a lot of them being Murloc Knights. It's really hard to judge, but that's my opinion. I think it will potentially see play, but not in a Murloc Paladin deck, in a regular Paladin with Murloc Knight. Arc Thief Rafam. So my first instinct with this card is to compare him to Ronin. He's kind of similar. It's Battlecry versus Death Rattle. It's 1 more mana, it's 1 more health, but you're getting card draw off of this big beefy minion. Ronin synergizes with Archmage in a sense that Archmage plus 3 missiles is pretty damn good. So he's got that going for him. And the bottom line is kind of like Ronin sees very occasional play currently, and otherwise doesn't make the cut. So just kind of comparing it to that, you can kind of compare it to Nefarian a little bit. getting 2 random spells, 8/8 instead of 7/8. Nefarian doesn't see any play, not even Dragon decks. So my gut instinct there is that this card is not going to see any play. The 3 cards that it can trigger, I don't know where they are. I don't want to just look for them right now, but I know that they are deal 10 random damage for 10 mana, give +10/+10 for 10 mana, and fill your board with 3/3s. And you get to choose, which is really nice. Compared to something like Nefarian, where it's super random, this card you always get what you want. But I think the question is, when do you really ever want those cards? Fill your board with 3/3s is like probably going to be consistently the best one. Like, it's kind of like almost the Paladin card I was talking about. Fill your board with mostly Murloc Knights. Fill your board with 3/3s. Fill your board with 3/3s is like okay. Like, it's solid, right? But you had to play this guy on 9 that had no real board impact and potentially just gets big game hunted or any hard removaled. It doesn't have any real impact when you play it. So you're foregoing playing something much more threatening, like Ysera, Ragnaros, anything else, an Alex, whatever. To play this guy, it's tough. It's the 9 and then the 10 is pretty slow for a lot of decks, and the versatility is really nice, because if you already have like a bunch of little stuff on the board, then you don't want the 3/3s. You can take one of the other cards, but you can't count, like, the 10 random damage is going to be almost never good. You can't combo with anything. You can't like play a quality like you could with Avenging Wrath. It's like, if you compare it to Ronin with that card, you're paying 3 mana for 9 random damage as opposed to 10 mana for 10 random damage. It's kind of insane, to show you how bad that card kind of is. And the +10/+10 is just, you need a minion, and then it's like a worse Pyroblast in a way, if you use it as a finisher at least. I don't know. I'm very skeptical about this card. I just don't think it does enough. Mostly because you have to play him on 9. Like, if you had the 10 mana spell that was just fill your board with 3/3s, like, maybe that's okay sometimes. It's hard to say. Like, Onyxia is garbage, but that's because, Onyxia gets hard removed and then the whelps aren't very threatening. It's not that easy to remove a board of 3/3s. There's not that much AoE that really does it. Yeah, I'm sure you all know with patrons, like, some decks just can't do anything. A hunter has literally nothing he can do for 3 damage AoE other than Acid Maul and Dread Scale. That'll be the day. In fact, yeah, there obviously, you guys know what they are that do clear it, but there aren't that many. So that card's like okay. And I'm hesitant to just say that this is trash, but I do think it's a little too slow and just doesn't have as big enough effect. Mostly because you're doing it, you gotta do like this combo, right? You play this on 9, it has no impact on the board. It's like a Boulder Fist Ogre that gets big game hunted for 3 more mana, and then you play another card that has no impact on the board and builds your board. You're just gonna die. Like, you could try to get away with playing this and then do something else on 10, like summon your own board clear, and then after that play the 3/3s, but that just like takes too long. You're just gonna die to Force of Nature Savage Roar. You're gonna die to any other finisher. I don't see this card happening. This card is trash. There's not much to say about it. It's a conditional Ironbark Protector, and Ironbark Protector is like as good as it possibly could be. It's in the class that likes it the most because it's able to get to that high mana with Innervate and Wild Growth, so being neutral doesn't really give it a benefit, and you need a beast. It's just like, it's ridiculous. Excuse me. However, on the other hand, I believe this is just a card that the devs didn't plan to be good and constructed ever, and it's just kind of an interesting arena card. War Golem is an already okay arena card because it's not that frequent that you get those big finisher minions. So taking a War Golem can be okay. So taking this guy can be okay. He's just a little bit bigger War Golem that occasionally gets taunt. So yeah, might be okay in arena, and the constructed obviously garbage. I'm a believer in the Murloc Shaman after this. It might take a few more couple cards here and there than what League of Explorers is giving us, but I'm optimistic. This card is really powerful. +2/+2 across the board. There's not that much to that effect that we've seen in Hearthstone. We have Power of the Wild, the 2-mana Druid spell that gives +1/+1 across the board, and we have Competitive Spirit that gives +1/+1. Obviously, those cards are a lot cheaper, just printed on the card. This card gets cheap pretty quick, and for it to be 2 Darnassus or 2 Power of the Wilds, that's 4 mana, right? And with a Murloc deck, getting this to 4 mana, it doesn't seem that hard at all. Especially with the 0 mana Murloc that they revealed, which I think is going to be key to helping this card out. Kind of, if you ever played like Pirate Rogue, and you get the feel of, you're on like turns 6 or 7 or whatever, and you play your 1 mana pirates like the charging guy, maybe a buccaneer, South Sea Deckhand is charging guy, and you get to play Sky Captain Crag as well, and it feels pretty good. It's pretty powerful. But with the Tiny Fin, it's like giving you a coin almost, because it doesn't cost anything. So if you're on 5 mana, you just throw down 2 of the Wisp Murloc. Suddenly this is 5 mana, not counting anything you already had on the board. And on top of that, if you recall, Warlock Murloc decks, Warlock, whatever. Their key to success relied in the cards Blood Imp and Young Priestess. And that was because Murloc's biggest weakness was they got AoE down, and then you didn't have any card draw, and you just lost. So Blood Imp and Young Priestess got them out of range of a lot of spells, a lot of AoEs, and they were able to just build up with their 3-mana 2/3 that gives everyone more health, and their war leaders, and just get out of control and run you over. But the key was really getting that toughness onto them. So with this card, if you come out, strong with Murloc Shaman, you play your Tidecaller guy that's 2 mana, spawns 2 guys, and you play your war leader and your double like Wisp dudes. Suddenly, that's like 5 off of this card, and it's costing 2 mana all of a sudden. That's like including the other couple Murlocs you played that also got removed, but those ones stuck, and it's 2 mana for +2/+2, and it doesn't affect only your Murlocs, it gives your other stuff buffs. So if you ever had a totem out there, or you had, you played Defender of Argus, because maybe that sees play Murloc Shaman, your Flame Tongue totem, whatever else that's on the board, that also gets +2/+2. And it's just all your minions. I think it's super solid. It's exactly what a Murloc Shaman wants, and I'm optimistic about this card. I think it could be a thing. Obsidian Destroyer is really hard to evaluate. It's a little Dr. Boom-esque, as you can see. My instinct is that it's unplayable. Mostly because it's in Warrior. I think what the devs were going for was to help a Warrior in Arena. Obviously, you've all heard the outcries of how bad Warrior is in Arena. This is a really good Arena card. It's where, like I said before, War Golem is a fine Arena card. This is a really good War Golem. It could, this 1/1 taunts that you don't have to actually have a card for, are good. Like, Goldshire Footman off Belcher. It's obviously it's a 1/2, but it's really powerful because you didn't have to pay the extra card worth for the Sen'jin plus Goldshire when going up 1 mana to 5. So this card is going to be really good in Arena. In Constructed, though, if you look at a regular control deck that you wanted to shove this into, I don't think you can replace Baron Geddon or Dr. Boom with this card. It's clearly, in my mind, not as good as Dr. Boom. Like, it's got taunt, so maybe you think bolster, but that doesn't make any sense. You don't save your bolster card to combo with a 7-mana minion that itself doesn't even have taunt. It's like, that's not a thing. I can't see it competing with Boom and Geddon. Some people do cut Geddon occasionally, but that's because they want to curve lower, sort of. Not because they want another 7-ish drop. Or, the meta just really doesn't call for Geddon. There's really just not many like small minion based aggro decks for Geddon is when he comes out. But I don't see this card seeing play. It's not impactful enough. Like, yeah, the 1/1 Scarab might save it, and then you get another Scarab. And it might just save it in a way that it wasn't removed efficiently, and you got value out of it just being a 7/7. But I think it's not gonna make the cut for Constructed, but it's great for Arena, so I'm totally okay with it existing. Entomb. It's recycle, but you get the card. And if you're gonna be paying 6 mana to remove something, it's typically gonna be really good. That minion is gonna be really good. What's interesting about it is it's a high mana card, and decks have to be light on the high mana for some sort of somewhat obvious reasons. So what's kind of interesting about this card as opposed to recycle is you can kind of replace one of your threats in your list with Entomb, and then remove their, Tyrion Forge Ring, even like their Dr. Boom. Just remove anything big, and then suddenly your deck still has a threat. It's kind of like a effect of like what Thoughtsteal had going for it. Thoughtsteal was kind of versatile in that your deck list is so tight and you want to put in these certain threats and whatnot, and Thoughtsteal sometimes will just win you games because you would get these threats that you didn't have to like fill your card slots with, right? So Thoughtsteal gets you like something playable in the mid game and then another threat, and so now your deck is suddenly able to beat this other deck that you wouldn't have enough threats to threaten them. But Entomb, you could take out one of your bigger minions and just then remove theirs, and then now you'll still have that bigger minion in your deck. So from the deck building perspective, deck list, I think this card has serious potential. Recycle didn't have any of that. This is like I said, because you're gonna be removing something good with this card, you're gonna get rid of a Sylvanas, you're gonna get rid of a Tyrion, you're gonna get rid of something big and powerful, and a Sarah, whatever. You want it in your deck, not in their deck, because of what I was saying before. It lets you build your deck in a way that you're not any heavier on the high end of cards by including this as removal, since you're swapping it out for a threat later. So I'm optimistic about this seeing play. It's a little tough because when you're just thinking about removal, 6 mana, you got Light Bomb. Some people wish they could run 2 Light Bombs, but 2 Light Bombs too slow. But I think this is good enough to run one of it alongside Light Bomb even. 2 Light Bombs is really clunky because they don't always get value off of both, and if you draw, it's kind of like 2 Brawls are really strong, right? But the reason why a lot of lists only run 1, most of the time, some people will tech in 2 Brawls. When Patron was big, almost everyone teched in 2 Brawls. But the reason that people didn't really run two brawls, or they don't, when it's not a meta like that, is because having two brawls in your hand severely limits your options. And after you use one, you're not going to want to use the other one. So you have fewer options while you're holding them, and then once you play one, the value of the other one significantly drops. So when you ever draw two of them, and it's not in those matchups where you really need them, you just get screwed. And that's similar with Light Bomb. It's very similar to Light Bomb and why you often go one copy or not. But this card doesn't really have that issue. And like I said, for the reasons I said before, what makes it better than Recycle, I think it might be worth it. And with more and more silence effects, like not seeing play, cutting owls because lists are getting tighter and such, that makes this card even better. You know, people get greedy and run things that are vulnerable to silence, more frequently. Then this card gets good because it's good at removing those minions. And like I said, you swap out their Sylvanas into your deck. You suddenly have another threat. I think it could be sweet play. Reno Jackson. When I first saw this card, I thought it meant from your deck building stage that it had to have no more than one. But it's actually no more than one left. So I thought it was garbage before. Now I'm not so sure, because one of the decks you think you might see it in is like a control warrior sort of. But you could never run one Death Bite in a warrior deck. So you have to plan to draw one or both, I guess. Before you can get value off of this card. And in a deck that goes really late, maybe a Fatigue Warrior deck, maybe it does make sense. Maybe, some certain mill decks, maybe a mill druid in the same sense that they might run Tree of Life could run this card. Its stats aren't the worst. It's one less stat than Pit Fighter. It's really weird because you sort of need to be like running a deck tracker or writing all your crap down or just having a photographic memory to really utilize this card correctly or optimally. So it's tough to judge. I think right now it's unplayable in any of like the meta decks, any of the tournament scene decks that you see, the competitive decks. But it might find a home in something like Fatigue Warrior, where you just plan to use it really toward the end of the game. Maybe limit some of your things to only one of that you might have run two of before. Yeah, another thing is that 2 years from now, when there's Despite 2.0, that's like Despite but not Despite. It's a 4-mana 4/2 weapon that has a slightly different effect because design space is just getting encroached upon by other cards because there's just so many. You might be able to build a deck that's simply just one-ofs that's really strong. But for now, I don't think it's good. Except for in those very specific decks that aren't exactly competitive, and maybe it can push some of them to actually be competitive. Maybe you can run it in a grinder mage list. I don't know, but as far as the meta competitive decks, popular decks right now, this card isn't any good. Wobbling runs. I think this card has potential. Being at 2 attack with such a high value minion, like already people. Once upon a time, there was a little bit of crossover between Karen still seeing play with Shrinkmeister being out. And if you ever had, your Karen Shrinkmeistered and then Caballed, it was a nightmare. And this card just gets Cabal straight up. So that weakness in itself is crazy bad because that's so much value going switching over to the priest. But this card is just so sticky and there's just so many raw stats. Like if you compare it to Cairn, you're only losing one stat on the front end to gain what is it? It's fucking 6 stats versus, or I mean 9 stats versus 4 times 3 is 12, sorry, versus 9 is Karen is 9, so that's 3 more gained for 2 more lost here, right? I don't know why I'm derping on math right now. You're losing 1 stat on the front end, gaining 3 on the back end. There, solved. I think it might be good enough. If you run it in like a druid or a shaman deck that runs, flame tongues or savage roar, because it's just so sticky, and having the multiple minions for savage roar or even for bloodlust or flame tongue is just going to be really powerful. 6 slide is super competitive. You're running Emperor, you might be running Sylvanas, and it's kind of into that late game range where you just can't really have that many 6s. But it's just really good. It's really sticky, except for Cabal Nightmares. I don't know. It's interesting because it's Cairn was slow in the sense that the 4 power just wasn't that threatening. That's part of why you got caught. And this card has 2 power, so it's even more ignorable than the Yeti stats, because it's just like a weaker Oasis Snapjaw on the front end. So maybe the meta is just too fast right now for this card because you just ignore it. But in a deck like Druid where you have to clear everything, or Savage Roar is insane, and in a meta where there aren't that many silences other than like Hunter and Druid with Owls and Keepers, and if Shamans exist, then they got Earthshack. But I think it's really close to good. It's close to good. This card I think is bad. It's hard to say because it's like Hellfire that doesn't hit face, so you can't ever use it as reach, but you're not hurting yourself. But you're paying a whole nother mana for it. You're paying a whole nother mana for the secondary effect of shuffle this card in your opponent's deck, which is super interesting. And I love the design space of this card. But can you really afford to spend 5 mana for 3 damage? Like in a meta with the old Patron Warrior, yeah, I would have ran this card. It's cheaper than Light Bomb, and it's going to clear every patron. And the Patron Warrior isn't going to really want this card because I don't know. But even that matchup, like, they might find a time where they do want this card. The most interesting part is, like, you use this against an aggressive deck like a Hunter or a Zoo Warlock, and then they draw into this, and they lose a lot of tempo playing it. And if they had anything on board, that thing, they'll die too, or they have to trade in their board. But I just don't think that's painful enough for those decks to warrant paying an overcosted Hellfire. I'm pretty sure that's correct. It's a little bit like, yeah, maybe it's good in that matchup, those specific decks. But you can't run a card like that that's a little good in those matchups and then really bad in others. If you play a control matchup, control versus control, the other guys like might use this just to like win, right? So it'll come back to you, which I guess is something I didn't really consider. It comes back to you after they play it again, but it comes back into your deck. I don't know. It is really hard to judge that effect because it comes back into your deck. So if you've ever played like Beneath the Grounds, getting all of those Nerubians sometimes, like I just did an arena run right Beneath the Grounds, and sometimes I'd play on turn 3 because I had another turn 3. Disclaimer: the other 2 cards was Junkbot and I don't know, something else even worse. So that's why I kind of had to pick Beneath the Grounds. But there were matches where I would play on turn 3 with no other turn 3 play, and just not see any of them, right? So, but there are other times, you know, I'll see one of them. So this card, it seems like, but it's a lot better chance that they see it once than that you see it the second time, or the third time total, your second time. So that part might not be that relevant. I don't know, but if they hold on to it, you're like denying them a draw. But what I see happening is like, you play it, you clear this hunter's board, it goes into their deck. They draw it at some point, and then you clear their board some other time, and they've been holding this card. They now play it to clear, or they trade in something small, clear out your taunts with this, then, you know, put a couple of some small on the board maybe, or just prepare to set up lethal, and then it's going to be in your deck, and it's going to be useless to you, and they got this extra reach in a deck where they, I don't know. I don't think it's quite good enough. It's not broken enough for constructed. But it's definitely hard to judge how that is, because it doesn't hit face. So you give this to a hunter, and then they draw this card instead of, you know, their burn. That's pretty freaking big. So, but is it big enough to justify playing this in a deck that cares about the board even less than you? Wants it clear even more? You know, maybe a warrior deck, a control warrior that, you know, just loves the board being cleared so they can just, you know, eventually Alex and Grom you. I don't think it's good. I don't think it's good enough. I think it's got potential, but not quite good enough. Anubis South Sentinel is hard to judge because you're losing 2 stats from Pit Fighter to maybe gain 6, which is a pretty big swing. However, if you just think about like Dark Cultist, how often does your opponent actually let you get that, and how often do they have to play very inefficiently to avoid it? I don't think that often, especially with hard removals. You know, you could even get this to get use this to, the opponent could use this to their advantage to get BGH value. You know, they kill this off and buff something in the BGH range and BGH that, and then it's like almost a drawback, right? And then there's just going to be those times like Dark Cultist where you don't have a board and you play this and then they remove it. Except Dark Cultist, you didn't lose any stats. You played a spider tank for 3, so that was like okay. But this, you're playing worse than a Yeti for 5 mana. Like I brought up Pit Fighter, 2 less stats. Or sorry, did I say 2 less before? Because it's 3 less from 5/6 to 4/4. 3 less stats now to 6 stats later. 3 stats less of a card that never sees any play. Pit Fighter never sees any play. It's like, that's really bad. And then when the death rattle might not matter, might not happen, this card can't ever see play. It's not good enough. This card, on the other hand, is pretty hard to judge. This one, you're only losing 1 stat from Pit Fighter, and once again, Pit Fighter is a bad card. It doesn't see play. But this effect is so unique that maybe it's good. It's also like cast a copy on this one, so it's not just the effects. So if you can get this out and then later, you know, powered shield something else, or even just on turn 6 play this, with Powered Shield on another thing, then you draw 2 cards and they both get 2 health. It's pretty dang good. But that's like so optimistic. There's already some cards that exist where like you get the dream, it's really good, but they're not consistent enough to, you know, be worth it. I can't think of like, there just aren't that many great buff spells really in the game. Like Kings is cool, but how are you gonna pull that off? And in what situations is this really better than Faceless? The advantage over Faceless is you play this on 5, and because it's a 4/6, hope it's sturdy enough to just stick around. And then on the next turn, you buff something else that was still around, or you play something new and buff that. You don't want to play something new and buff to something new, really, because you're not getting value off of that minions. Yeah, you get minion off of this, so if you play something else in Kings, like you play Minibot Kings on 6 after playing this on 5, and then all of a sudden he's also getting the Kings, like, yeah, that's pretty good. But he had to stick around, and you're not going to combo this on like turn 10 where you play this and then a Argent Squire and a Kings on turn 10. Like, that's not reasonable. So I think it's just too gimmicky. It's kind of like a Dragonkin Sorcerer is just a little too gimmicky, and there just aren't quite enough buffs to make it good. Yeah. On the other hand, this card I'm optimistic about. The obvious comparison is Azure Drake. Discover, battle card discover spell is essentially draw a card. You know, with a small twist, you get to choose of 3, but they're randomish from mage and neutral, right? And 1 of 3 random spells is still probably worse than a card you intentionally put in your deck, which you'd get from Azure Drake. And then you're also losing the 1 spell power, and you're getting this different stat distribution, which, you know, you could argue all day about what's better, 6/3 or 4/4. If you ever played around with Justicar, 6/3 sometimes is like not terrible. And the difference between 3 and 4 mana is not as big as like between 4 and 5, for instance. So the health isn't that big of an issue here, and 2 attack is just good. I mean, still not in BGH range, and you know, who doesn't like more attack then, as long as you're not in BGH range. So stats are at least comparable, if not better in some situations. And then it's like you're losing spell power, but then you're guaranteeing a spell, which, you know, we know mage likes spells for mana worms and sorcerer's apprentices and whatnot, and you're not drawing it from your deck, which is good in some rare cases of fatigue. So it's got a few bonuses to kind of try to weigh out against Drake. I think the bottom line is that it's not really better than Drake, but in a little bit of a slower tempo mage list, I could see you running 2 Drakes and 1 copy of this card as your third 5-drop. You know, you're aggressive enough that, you know, you're not going to run Belcher. Like, if you're running Lotheb, maybe you could play this over Lotheb. It's kind of a meta call of like how needed Lotheb is, but maybe you try to run a suite of 4 or 5 drops. That's not unheard of. Maybe you curve out slower and higher, and you play, you know, Ronin. I don't know. I could see it being a one of alongside the Drakes, but I don't really see it being played over Drakes. Yeah, Drakes also are obviously are dragons, which give them more of a benefit, and if Dragon Mage is ever a thing. Naga Sea Witch, I'm pretty sure, is garbage. Like, yeah, it's kind of cool. You play this on 5, and then on 6 you get to play Nefarian for 3 mana cheaper or something. Ysera for 6 mana. So you play it for 5 mana, but all your stuff costs 5. So you're playing it for 6 mana. So you're really only getting 3 mana off, and you're playing a bad pit fighter as a penalty, and your bad pit fighter had to stick around. Turn 10, you can play this and Ysera, which is like about the dream, I guess. But how good is that really? Not that good, I don't think. And it makes your turns kind of awkward. Like, if it gets left out and then you don't have huge things in your hand anymore, suddenly you're limited to 2 cards a turn. If you're at 10 mana, you're 6, 7, 8, or 9, you're limited to 1 card a turn. Maybe a hero power if you're at 7 or 8 or 9. 6, you're 1 carded. No matter what, I don't think you can put this in your deck. It doesn't make any sense. You know, you try to throw this in a druid or something, and it's your only 5-drop to play on 5 because, you know, you just didn't draw the dream, because you're not always going to draw the dream. And then on turn 6, your hand looks like Innervate, Swipe, Darnassus Aspirant or something. You know, I don't know, some other smallish, mid-range-ish stuff. This card is just making them cost more. And to play a card that gives you a negative, that's a bad pit fighter, that's insane. So there's just no way this card's good. Summoning Stone is one that is especially hard to judge. On the surface, it's just garbage. It's just too slow. To combo it with something is too late in the game, and that's the only way you're going to get assured value out of it. Playing it on turn 6, you know, with an Arcane Missiles is just not going to be good. You're going to get, you know, some crappy 1-drop. And then it's just going to die at no cost to whatever their minions are on the board. Like, it heals you 6, I guess. It's just not impactful enough. You know, you're gonna get the dream. You're gonna play you're gonna get to turn 9 somehow, without dying. You're gonna play this, plus you're gonna fireball the enemies. You know, Druid Claw. You're gonna get the dream, and then your 4-mana minion is gonna be, you know, I can't offhand. What's the worst 4-drop? Mogushan Warden or something. Like, maybe Mogushan's actually okay because it's taunt and it saves this card for future value. But you know, there's a lot of bad 4-drops. Maybe you get Tournament Medic and that's useless to you, and whatever. That's like the dream situation, and then you get Tournament Medic and it's just bad. Yeah, it's not good. This card's garbage. There's like nothing to say. It's like, if you look at Pit Fight or Pit Lord, and see that Pit Lord never sees play. And this card is a card that's a Lost Tall Strider for +2 attack. A Salty Dog for 1 last mana. With the downside of Ancient Curse. I assume Ancient Curse is like the mine, where you still get your card drawn if you don't get your card that you draw, or you don't get your card draw that turn. It's just like, that's mind-boggling to me. It has to be like the bomb from Iron Juggernaut, where you still get your card. The only like redeeming factors of this card is kind of like in a deck with Fel Reaver, where you might skip over this without actually drawing it, and or with maybe a zoo list that runs Pit Lord 2, and then you run Moltons on top and try to combo it that way. But then you're gonna like play your Flame Imps and your Pit Lord and this guy, and you're just gonna play against, you know, whatever deck, and you're gonna life tap a couple times. You're gonna get kind of low, and your hand's gonna be filled with these Moltons, so you're gonna let yourself get kind of low, and then you get these Moltons out, and then you just draw this card and you just die. Is insane. And then on top of all this, it gets BGH'd. And in a deck that you would play this in, like the reason Fel Reaver, it saw play for a little bit, and then people were like, wait a minute, this keeps getting BGH'd, and that's like the nightmare for a deck that wants to play Fel Reaver, because what you gain by playing this card, this cheap, 8/8 for 5, suddenly you're down 5 mana, and the other guys played like an okayish 3-drop at a 4/2, and so they're not really losing any mana. You've lost 5 mana in like a whole turn in a deck where you're trying to close out the game fast. That's giving them so much breathing room that's why Fel Reaver got out of the meta and is just seeing resurgence now, because people have been cutting BGH because decks weren't having as many targets. Classic mid-range druid, only ran boom, and these other decks, Secret Paladin, only like gets boom and then like the avenge hit sometimes on the challenger, and having that BGH in your hand early is just not good enough because you didn't draw your other 3-drop or whatever, and you can't play it early as a tempo BGH because it just dies so easily at the 2 health. BGH just kind of fell out of the meta. There just weren't enough targets to justify it. Face hunters don't run anything. They don't reach boom. They don't. Now that some of them, it's just more mid range, kind of puts Fel Reavers in and such now. But BGH was why Fel Reaver wasn't seeing play, and because Fel Reaver is seeing play now, you even see some double BGH's lists, just to counter it. That's a nightmare when it gets BGH'd for you when you're running it. And then this card getting BGH'd, like, you could try to make an argument that, like, yeah, if this gets BGH'd from 4, then your Fel Reaver on 5 isn't getting BGH'd. Yeah, maybe that's true. But it's too much of a tempo loss to get this BGH'd. And to get a Lost Tall Strider with +2 attack, like, if you just reprinted Lost Tall Strider as a 6/4 with no downside, the utter garbage. Never play that. And so then, how much attack do you have to give a Lost Tall Strider to see play? Is a great question that I don't really know the answer to. But I don't think it's 7, and especially not with this potential drawback. Like, yeah, you might not ever draw that 7 damage, but 7/4, it's like the 6/4, like I said, you never play. 7/4 is better, but it gets BGH'd. So 4 health is just still so miserable because of Deathbite, True Silver, Flame Cannon, Swipe, everything that does 4 damage. I don't know. If you put this as an 8/4, would it be good? Maybe it's getting better for sure, but 7/4, I don't see it. Animated Armor. I love this card. I love the design of this card. I love the both artistically and from a game designer point of view. I think it's super interesting. I still think it's good enough value. Like I always say, like for a card to make the cut in Hearthstone, they typically either have to be good on curve, so on turn 4, or they have to win you the game. This card then doesn't really do either. Late game, it's not good against Force Savage Roar because you just put 1 tree into it, and it's been worse than Sen'jin. Like, it's good against a Pyroblast finisher, but that's super rare. A Hunter can owl it just like he can owl a Sen'jin, and it's even less damage that the Hunter has to put into it than a Sen'jin. Like, it's sort of interesting if you can hide it behind some other taunt, maybe. And then spell finishers can't hit your face, but they still just hit this guy instead. And then best case scenario, it's been like healing your face 4. like refreshment vendors sometimes use some play kind of as a heal your face. But this doesn't even necessarily heal your face, because sometimes they do just want to kill your minion, and then you've played a 4-mana 4/4, which is a worse Yeti, which Yeti is not good. So yeah, this card just isn't good enough. I feel like as a class card, this could have just been a 4/5. Just be a class card is a better Yeti. That's fine as a class card. I think it could have just been a 4/5, and then it might have been good enough. But at 4 damage, it's just gonna get killed by a Despite, and it's just gonna be bad, and it's not quite good enough. It's like you compare it to Senjin, which doesn't see play anymore, really. Like very rarely it can see play. If you compare it to Senjin, there's times where you would rather have a Senjin with the 5 health. If there's times where you would rather, more than just really rare cases, right? Where you'd rather have a Senjin than this card, then something's not really right with this card. Yeah. Your statue, I'm kind of optimistic about. I think, yeah, it gets big game 100, but if you play this in like Watcher Druid with even Wailing Soul, but especially with Argus and Sun Fury, this card said just can't attack. It's still almost good enough to play like you would play an Ancient Watcher, right? This is Ancient Watcher is it's a Yeti for 2 that can attack, so that's 2 mana discount. This is obviously War Golem's terrible, but it's a War Golem for 4 that can't attack if you think of it that way. So it's 3 mana discount where it's a worse card that's discounted, but it's a bigger discount. And then on top of that, it can attack sometimes. Like this is going to be rare, but unless it's the only mana on the battlefield, is going to be rare. But it is better than just can't attack. So in that case, like maybe even a Hamlock tries to put it in. I'm not sure if it's going to be able to outcompete with Mountain Giant and Twilight Jake, but some decks that run double Argus or Sun Furies, like Watcher Druid, just seems good. Like Watcher Druid obviously isn't a top tier deck right now or anymore, but it could maybe it makes a comeback with this. Maybe you just squeeze one of this in Handlock, like even if you use it as a Shadow Flame target at turn 8, that's pretty crazy. It's kind of like Molten or Mountain Shadow Flame. I don't know. I'm pretty optimistic about this card. So I love this card. It's super fun, super great. The design is cool. I like that it exists. I think it's in a perfect spot where it isn't good enough to see competitive play, but it's kind of this RNG wacky fun that I wouldn't want it to see competitive play. But it's not terrible that you can't just play it, on casual on ladder or even ranked on ladder, right? People run some crazy stuff on ladder and do okay. You see Dog streams, Major Domo Mage, right? Major Domo's not good, but he can still win games and still have fun with it. So this card is going to be a little similar to Major Domo, except it's not going to need to be a deck built around it as much as Major Domo, so it's less restrictive in the kind of deck you can put it into. But I saw like there was like a Reddit comment I read once that was something like, draw 10 cards to finally find this card and play it, then draw 10 cards to finally find the Golden Monkey map and play it, then draw another 10 cards to find the Golden Monkey and play it, and then the one card that's left in your deck is now turned into a Lorewalker Cho. And I smiled at that. That was funny, and that's a situation that could happen. And you should all know, when you first play Hearthstone, it's scary. When you see the other guy with all these legendaries, you're like, oh my god, pay to win. what is this? This card is bullshit, whatever. But a deck with all legendaries isn't good. You can Google, I think Day 9 or somebody plays, a deck with full legendaries, and then they play it and it's not great at all. Maybe they win a game every here and there, but part of that problem is because the low tier legendaries don't do a whole lot, like Cho and Pagel. So you can't get to where the later games are good. And that is worth of note, because by the time you actually pull all this crap off, you are going to be in the later stages of the game, and legendaries are typically better later. But you still can't give up your finishers. You don't want your Force of Nature Savage Roar to transform into legendary minions. So, like I said, it's not going to be viable at the very least, because it's not going to be consistent enough. But it's a fun card, and it's not going to be broken, but it's playable-ish on casual, online, or whatever. I think that's where the perfect place for it to be. I don't want to see, Huskaka play Ties and run this card and draw the cards back to back, and then have the final effect be so good that he just wins the game. No, it's in a good spot. This card is like a totally fair card. You should compare it to Gnomish Inventor. So you're getting a mech tag and 1 attack at the cost of having to have another mech in order to get this draw card effect. So Gnomish Inventor actually sees play. Ties ran it in his patron deck in BlizzCon. That says something about Gnomish Inventor. Gnomish Inventor has been in and out of decks for a long time. Used to be almost like a staple in Shaman, and obviously it was in the other Patron Warrior because it was so reliant on card draw and cycle, and it even got charged off of War Song. But Gnomish Inventor is just like really close to okay as a card, because the stat line is just like what you would want about in a draw card. And you get, obviously you get that card off of it, and it's a solid card. And when this card works, it's just like a better Gnomish Inventor. And you're getting another mech that you get to choose from, so you have some leeway in like finding a card that you want to play about now, as opposed to when you just draw a card, maybe you're drawing something that you don't want right now. You have a little more freedom, but it's random. But at least it's a mech, and there aren't that many garbage mechs. And there's some garbage mechs. There's not that many garbage mechs. So when you consider that, all that, I think it's good. You got some sticky mechs like Anoyatron. And such. Like, the problem with that this card sees is it competes for a slot with Shredder, and even in the most popular mech deck, Mage, it competes with Goblin Blast Mage, and you can't not run 2 of each of those other cards. So can you run a 5th 4-drop, and is it better than Mechanical Yeti, which gives you that spare part for Archmage or Flamewaker or whatever you're running that you like spare parts for? It's tough to say. I think probably it's better than Mech Yeti, but that 5th 4-drop, I'm not sure it sees a slot. And the other thing is card draw in the mech decks that exist right now don't really look for card draw, because they're just looking for burn and these tempo minions that they can play and just close out the game. So they don't want to lose tempo playing a card draw card. That's all very true. But it's a solid card. It's statted about like what you would expect, and it's just solid all around. Those keys are going to be that the types of decks that exist right now mech decks aren't really gonna run it. But I was thinking earlier that like maybe a mech warrior wants to run this card because mech warrior does have Screwjack Clunker in the 4 slot, but Screwjack Clunker is kind of a defensive card. Like, yeah, you get the charge part out of the +2/+2 that it gives to another mech, but it only has a 2/4 stat line, so it's not very aggressive. So maybe this makes it in as like a one of, as just like card draw to keep you going, as maybe a slightly slower list in Mech Warrior. I don't know. It's a fine card, but can it compete with those other ones, I think is the issue, and in those deck types. That I'm not sure about. This card I think is trash. It's Ogre Magi. Like, yeah, you get another spell power, but now they get both of the spell power. The dream is you play this in like Moonfire on 4, and then on 5 you get like a super good swipe or Starfall or something. Yeah, a 6 with 3 AoE swipe would be really strong. And maybe you could even hold this card until turn 8 to do both of them. But then they get to retaliate with +2 spell power. And yeah, some decks won't be able to take advantage of it, but other ones will punish you for it. You can't play this card versus like a freeze mage unless you try to use it as like a finisher. They're just gonna fire back at you even harder, and you're not gonna be able to kill them because ice block. So it's not good enough. It's got the beast tag, but it's like I said, it's like Ogre Magi. It's just not really good. It's not good enough. 4 health isn't sturdy enough for 4 drop. It's not good. This card, on the other hand, is really good. Even if you play this as a turn 6 play with a hero power, like at first I thought it was just opponent minions, like an Aldoir, and I was hesitant about if it was any good. But when you can use it on either one, it's like really good. 6 mana, 3/3 and 3/4. It's like okay. It's like you compare it to Murloc Knight. Like it's really similar to comparing to Murloc Knight. This is what I was talking about earlier with the anyfin can happen. Summon the 7 Murlocs. Like if you're already running Shredders and maybe 1 or 2 of this card, you can't run Murloc Knight. But if you compare this to Murloc Knight on 6, a 3/3 Murloc is like average or better. It's better than average, I think, of what the odds are. Like some of the Murlocs are kind of insane, like War Leader and the Charge. So you got like kind of that high end of like those cards can almost win you the game by like putting your Murloc Knight out of reach, or just having that charge be able to be used as like removal to keep your Murloc Knight safe, you know? Those really high impact couple cards. Give some more merit to Murloc Knight. But just raw stat wise, this is like better than the average Murloc Knight on 6. And that's like the worst case scenario, right? The better case scenario is you played something earlier, like you played a mini bot that already killed a 3/2 and then also killed a 1/1 running into it, and it's now just like a 2/1, and then you can just play this on 4 and then buff that 2/1 to a 3/3 and then get more value out of that. Or just use it on the hero power that you used earlier because you missed your 2 or 3 drop or something and it's still live. And then that's not even including the times when you want to use it as removal. Like you use this on the Dr. Boom body and then trade something up into it. Trade your Shredder into it. Trade something. There's going to be times where that's going to be good too. So the versatility in this card I think is good. The times where you have an empty board and they have something that's about a 3/3 and you just have to, or also an empty board and you have to play it as a 4 mana 3/4, it's not the end of the world. Like yeah, you're paying a 1 mana higher spider tank, but it's not the end of the world. So I definitely think it's a good card. This card I think is garbage. the game would need a lot more good battle cries for this to be good. If you, I was talking about this earlier, you value it like it's ship cannon effect, but it's also like, what was I was comparing this to something earlier. It's a 4-mana 2/6. Deal 2 damage to random enemy when you play a battlecry minion. Like 2 damage to a random enemy is worse than an arcane shot, right? Arcane shot is 1 damage, or it's 2 damage to a specific enemy. It's to a random enemy, so the effect has to be worth less than 1 mana. Like, yeah, there's the card part of arcane shot cost tied into it, and draw a card is sometimes worth like 1 mana or 1.5 mana or something. So the random effect is maybe it's worth around 1 mana total, like, because it's less than the 1 mana, but it doesn't need a card, but it still needs you to play a whole another battle cry minion. And how often is that gonna happen? You could combo this on 6 with a loot hoarder. Like, that's not a good turn 6. It's a mediocre turn 6 at best. And then you have to then play a string of battle cries for it to be okay. And that many good battle cries just don't exist. To where you can't afford to play a battle waste a snapshot on 4. Yeah, there's all there is to say about it. It's not good enough. I'm optimistic about this card. It's lost Tallest Strider for 4, which is obviously bad, but coin is pretty valuable. If you ever played Pirate Rogue and you played the 3-mana 5/4 that becomes a 5/4 if you have a pirate on the board, it feels pretty good to play. Having a full mana discount is a big deal. When a minion's reasonably statted, like 5/4 is just like, it's okay, you know. And yeah, you're getting it's a bigger deal that you're getting a coin later. So like for tempo reasons, it's obviously better to play a 3-mana 5/4 than to pay a 4-mana 5/4 that also gives you a mana, because obviously playing it on turn 3 is ideal. However, the coin is really valuable for Rogue. It can be used for combos and Edwins and whatever, to where maybe it's good enough. There's still that kind of just like tempo mid-range Rogue deck that has always been kind of close to existing, and even kind of existed at one point with like Argent Commander. I remember like Savid's running a tempo Rogue back in the day, you know. I think with the Defias Bandit dudes and whatever back in the day, maybe post Nax or pre Nax, somewhere around there, where tempo Rogue did exist before, you know, oil. And maybe that deck gets good enough with just a few more cards, and this card sees a slot. Like, this card isn't going to see a slot in just a standard oil list. It's not going to make it in. It's not going to be better than the Teacher or the Shredder. But some deck that doesn't quite exist yet, it might be good. This card, once again, comparing to Gnomish Inventor, is just a very reasonable card. Same stats as Gnomish Inventor, about the same effect. Doesn't require needing something like the Gorilla does, so then it gets the same amount of stats. In this meta with all the Shredders, 3/3 is almost maybe even better than 2/4 actually, because it at least kills the front half of Shredder, whereas Shredder can eat Gnomish Inventor and then trade in as a 4/1 up, and that's miserable. If you ever your 2/4 died of the Shredder, you know how that feels. So maybe the 3/3 is even better, especially with 2/3s became more popular, since 3/2s saw a decrease, especially because of like mad scientists Losing a 3-2 to a mad scientist is a nightmare. Anyway, yeah, so this is a beast. You get a beast. You get to choose the beast out of 3 randoms, right? Which is going to be about equal to drawing a card of a card you put in your deck on purpose. Because once again, it's random, but you get to choose a little bit. So whereas you get a good card from your deck, this one you might get a not as good card from random, but you maybe get to choose one that's like coming up for turn 5. You know, something that you can play or combo with something else. Maybe you get a 3 mana beast that you combo with another 3 mana with your animal companion or whatever, and that you play on 6, or on 5 you do it with a juggler or whatever. I think it's very reasonable. I think because most beasts aren't great unless you're using them as beasts, it probably could only see play in like Hunter, mid-range slower Hunter, or a Beast Druid if that becomes a thing. But it's a very reasonable card, and it's like okay, it's good design. Torch. There's been a lot. I've had a lot of debate about this with my friends and whatnot, and I think my conclusion is that it's not good enough in a tempo deck, because how many cards do you actually draw in your tempo deck? And then remember, this doesn't get shuffled into your deck at the start of the game. The Roaring Torch part doesn't. It doesn't happen until you actually play it, so you have to wait till like turn 3 or later to put it into your deck. So all those cards you've already drawn couldn't have been it, obviously. So you have like a 1 in whatever how many cards are left chance to draw it, you know, each turn for however long turn the game lasts, which often, you know, with Tempo Mage isn't that long. So you're probably not going to get it, and it's going to be a worse Frostbolt. And in that case, you're going to want to just put like Flame Cannon in your deck. Like a lot of Tempo Mages already cut 1 Flame Cannon, like I don't think a Tempo Mage would put this in before a second Flame Cannon. Yeah, it can go face, but it's 3 damage for 3 mana as opposed to 4 damage for 2 mana, and then you might not get the other half. However, in a deck like Grinder Mage or a Freeze Mage that goes through your whole list, this could be good. The only problem I really see in Freeze Mage is that the list could be too competitive and too tight, and Frostbolt's too required for Ice Lance, that it's hard to put this in. But I definitely think they'll find space at least for 1, because like I said, the list is so tight because you need that removal and whatnot, and you need those key cards like Alex and Emperor and Archmage, that having more potential damage, you know, versus classes that have healing and whatnot that could just, you know, out heal or out armor your damage, having more potential damage is going to be really good, and you're going to actually get the value because you're going to be able to have the game last long enough that you draw the Roaring Torch and have it pay off. So in a deck like that, and especially and then in a grinder type mage, a fatigue mage, even, you're not drawing, or you put that extra card in your deck, so you have a 31 or 32 card deck, so that while you grind them out to fatigue, you're taking longer to get to fatigue, right? So in those couple of decks, it could be good, very solid, but not in a tempo list, because you're losing tempo playing extra mana for this Frostbolt or Flame Cannon to very possibly not draw this cheaper Fireball later. That's about it. Brawn is super hard to judge. It's a one of only because it's legendary, so you can't really build around it. Like, people build around Emperor, but Emperor gives you these crazy gimmick combos that really just win you the game. And the decks that they really rely on Emperor and they don't just shove him in, like Druid just kind of shoves him in because he's just kind of like so stupid in that deck that it's just good enough on a few cards. You know, decks like Freeze Mage or Patron Warrior or Malekith Warlock, you know, really need the Emperor, but they all have really good draw engines and lots of card draw to get them. you're not really gonna put this into a deck that has so much card draw to get him to build a deck around. But it's a 2/4 for 3. It's not that much worse than Spider Tank. Because what battle cries are so good to trigger twice? Not that many. Like, put in Handlock. You have the dream of play it on 3 and then play Twilight Drake on 4 and you have tons of health. But you don't want to play a 2/4 on 3. Like, you play an Imp King boss, it's just like so much more powerful. Some Handlock lists, like even put in Imp King boss or, Malagos lists that needed a little more early game control to be able to get to their combo. Maybe, put an Imp King boss. And Imp King boss is just going to be so consistent, so decent. And this is going to be so not consistent. Like, yeah, the dream, you play this in Mistcaller. But Mistcaller, you can't play it already because it's just not good enough. It's too slow. I don't know. Some people are raving about this card and think it's going to be really good. I don't think it's going to be that good on the other hand. At least I think it needs more broken battle cries. Like, the best battle cries in the game is like, cards like Big Game Hunter and Alex Straza, where this doesn't have any effect. This is you just target it twice and it doesn't do anything more. Yeah, so what are you going to do? Run Novice Engineer with it and get an extra card? You don't want to run Novice Engineer. Especially when there's no guarantee to ever draw a Brawn. It might be on the bottom of your deck. I don't think it's good enough. Desert Camel, I do think it might be good enough. It's, I really like the design space. It's 2/4 for 3, so it's naturally not very aggressive. So it's not that great to just shove into Face Hunter. But it still might be okay to shove into Face Hunter because of how many 1-drops they can run. But the interesting design space is that you play this versus a Warrior, they'll never have a 1-drop, standard lists, of course. So you're going to get value. You're going to pull out your Web Spinner. You're going to pull out your Abusive Sergeant, whatever you're running in your mid-range hunter lists. And you're going to get value. And then the 2/4 stat line is a little weak, but it curves out into Howlmaster on 4. And if you've ever had a Leok on 3 that didn't feel great, but then you Howlmastered it, and all of a sudden this 4/6 taunt is just like very sufficient. Like, yeah, you would have rather had Misha and had a 6/6 taunt, but the 4/6 just gets the job done. And having 4 health is like a 2/4 is like what you would want, right? You don't want 1 attacks. You wouldn't want like a 1/5. So if you have 6 stats to play with and you want to have a 3-drop that curves into 4 for Howlmaster, you would put the 6 stats as a 2/4. Because times you don't have Howlmaster, you couldn't have it be a 1/5 because the 1/5 is just not going to do anything. So 2/4 is what you want. And then those other decks like that do have 1-drops often have 1 or 2, and if they've already played them on turns 1 and maybe 2, then they're not going to have any left. And you could purposely put in a couple more, maybe run 5 or 6 1-drops, maybe. It's a little debatable. But definitely Web Spinners and Abusives are fine. And getting a 2/1 and a 2/4 on 3 is good. The only question is going to be, like, it'll be a little bit of a meta call in how powerful other people 1-drops are. You don't really want to whip out a Zombie Chow necessarily. Late game, maybe you do. You whip out the Zombie Chow and you heal up for some reason. I don't know what matchup. There's not that many times that you're gonna need a Chow as a hunter and then still have a chance at winning the game. Anyway, But there will be some times where you could rip out a Northshire cleric and just kill it with whatever else you have on the board, and they're not going to get any value out of that, which is pretty good. So yeah, I think this. I'm optimistic about this card, and I really like it. I think it might see play. And this card, I love that it's a fierce monkey, and it's 3 mana taunt beast like Silverback Patriarch with another 2 attack. So it's like an angry monkey, kind of like got the play on Magma Rager and Ice Rager. So he's the angry monkey. Silverback Patriarch's just like the sloth, sleepy monkey, whatever. That docile doesn't hurt very much. This guy's angry and he hurts, so he's got +2 attack. He's warrior only, and in a standard warrior list, maybe it sees tech in a couple times. There was a period where warriors liked to pour on Senjin, and this card is like maybe better than Senjin. Especially it doesn't ever compete with Shredder. Sometimes, Patron Warrior runs Shredder in the new one. I don't think this wouldn't make it into Patron, I don't think. But it also has that benefit of bolster maybe being a thing someday. And a 3-mana 3/4 taunt is just pretty good. Spider tank with a potential upside and a potential bolster effect, and on top of that, it's going to be great for Arena once again. Warrior Arena common class card that's a potentially better spider tank is just super good for Arena, and it's just a super fair, above average card for constructed that might just see play in some decks. Maybe it's only a one of, but it's got potential for sure. Raptor, this guy's kind of cancerous. It's a 3-mana shredder. It's the next tier down from, they got Piloted Shredder at summons of 4, or Sky Golem summons of 4, and then Piloted Shredder summons of 2, and it summons of 1. It's got like the same kind of stat distribution as Piloted Shredder, where its mana cost equal to attack and health is 1 less. It's sticky for Savage Roar. It's a beast for if Beast Druid actually ever becomes a thing. It's 3 mana, which Druid didn't really have a good 3 mana. Druid of Flame is fine, but it's not really good for mid-range combo Druid. Shade is good, but it's like Shade isn't always good, right? This card is always kind of good. Like, yeah, you're gonna get some crap 1-drops here and there, but sometimes you're gonna get injured Faldir or Flame Imp or Mana Worm or something crazy good. On the other hand, and it's just gonna be broken. So I think this star is definitely strong. Can it compete with Shades? Is a very good question. It's gonna be better. Not cheated out. It's gonna be better just on turn 3 when you need it. Like if you ever play a Shade on 3 versus a Hunter and you have to use it to clear something, this is gonna be better than the Shade. But it's not quite as good when you really need it to stick around. Like late game where you put it down and then you just expect to get an extra 5 damage out of your combo, or turn 1 where you innervate it. Those situations is not going to be as good. Maybe it becomes a third 3-drop in Druid. Maybe some metas they take out BGH and it becomes a third 3-drop and that there's no BGH at all, or maybe it's just on top of BGH because BGH obviously isn't really a 3-drop. Per se. So maybe it sees a 1-of as a third 3-drop. Maybe they run it. Maybe you run it instead of Shades in some metas and not in certain ones. But it's definitely very Very solid card. Shredder for 3. This card's super good too. For this one's for Rogue. Spider tank. Once again, a class spider tank with another upside of battle cry. Choose a friendly minion. Like, you don't have to combo it. It will be a spider tank at the worst case scenario. Obviously without the mech effect, but it'll be a 3/4 for 3. But when you do get to use it, maybe you're running an aggro list and you're running Leprognomes and you just get a nice Leprognome Death Rattle copy. Maybe you just play it on turn 4 to be safe. Maybe you play Shredder on 4 and then on 5 you play this plus some strong 2-drop, your Juggler, your whatever, and you copy the Shredder effect. Maybe you play it late game and you copy a Sylvanas, which would be insane. Maybe you copy your Blood Mage Thalnos. I don't know, but it's like it's so low risk, high reward, I think, and super solid. I like it. I want a more minion based rogue to exist, and yeah, I think it's pretty good. I love the design space of this card. I'm not sure how good it's gonna be. They get a card that says at the start of their turn they take damage, so they have to take at least 2. And if you're both spending 2 mana, it's 0 mana, deal 2 damage to the enemy hero minimum. Because you both pay 2 mana, right? So 0 mana, deal 2 damage to the enemy hero is kind of like fair cost. That is steady shot, right? Because hero powers are budgeted to be worth 0 mana cards because you don't have to actually draw a card to use them, or you don't have to lose a card. So for example, Paladin is a Wisp, so if there was a card to exist, it would be 0 mana, deal 2 damage, which is what this is minimum as a 100 hero power. But then potentially there could be a situation, you could set up situations where they don't want to cast a spell, where you could combo with Loatheb and guarantee like 4 damage at least out of it. You combo it with any like the Trogs for a little bit of value. I don't think that's going to be good enough, but like it's a fair card. Like I said, it's worst case it's a 0 mana 2 damage to face. Sometimes you'll be able to mill them. They have 9 cards and you do this. It'll be rare, but that could happen sometimes. I think the key is that like Warlock doesn't have anything to gain out of this. Like if this was a Tempo Mage card, like maybe you'd run in more of like a Burn Mage list or something. But with Mana Worm and Sorcerer's Apprentice and Flame Waker getting the spell bonus, and then the other guy not getting a spell bonus, would be a pretty big swing. So yeah, I don't know. With Warlock not being on the benefit from it, it just might not be broken enough to play. But it's definitely fun. It's cool design space. And it's fair, like I said. And there are some ways to combo with it, with Loatheb and Trogzor and whatever. Yeah, it's cool. It's borderline. It's fair. I don't know. I don't think it's broken enough to see play. Dart Trap. It's like if it was one way or the other, it would be really powerful. If it was only minion or only face, it would have more potential. Like Snipe is kind of like only minion 4 damage. And Snipe is like not even that bad. The thing with Snipe is like if Snipe gets popular, it's too easy to play around. Like Like Dart Trap has a little bit of a problem, you know, like if it was minion only, obviously it could hit bad minions, but because it's random, they don't get to control, so they can't play their shielded minibot into it. They just might get screwed when it hits their Azure Drake or their Emperor or whatever. If it was face, obviously it's Mind Blast for Hunter, which would be insane. It's definitely cool design space. I like the trigger effect when you use enemy opposing hero powers used. That isn't explored as a trap trigger yet. So that's cool. I really like that. But random enemy, I think, is just not going to be good enough because you can't really put it in Face Hunter. Like it's kind of the same problem with Fist of Draxus. Fist of Draxus is inconsistent enough because you want to use it in like an aggressive list typically, but you use it in an aggressive list and then it hits, you know, a bad minion and then you're kind of screwed. It's got that symptom of being either or, means you don't know what deck to put it in, so you don't put it in your deck. Is kind of how I think it works. Maybe try to run a one of for a while, just to keep you guessing and make you scared to use your Hunter hero power or something, but and cheat a win when it hits your face, right? But I don't think it's gonna be good enough. Yeah, it would be pretty funny though to play it on turn 2 against a handlock who just doesn't have a minion yet and then uses their hero power. Explorer Head's too slow. Not much to say about it. Give a +1/+1 should be valued at about 1 mana, because it's like half of a power of the wild druid card. But that card hits all your minions. It's like a half of a marker of the wild. Right. Sorry, misspoke. It's Kings is +4/+4 for 4 mana. And then you got +2/+2 and taunt for 2 mana. So +1/+1 should be 1 mana about. So you're playing a 1 mana card for 2 mana. You're losing tempo for this bonus of you get to play it again. And you don't want to play another bad card again, right? It's like Skeletal Knight. You don't want to play bad minion over and over. Like Salty Dog-esque type of a thing. You don't want to keep playing Salty Dogs for extra mana. Just for that card advantage. Because tempo is just more important than card advantage in this day and age. And so this card's no good. Some small synergies with Lock and Load and Feign Death, but it's not enough. This card is very reasonable. Zooey Warlocks don't really look for card draw or need card draw because of their hero power. But there's a time where Zoo Warlocks start even putting in Cult Master because card draw is good. Even for Zoo Warlocks. And this is like special card draw where you're gonna get this 1-cost card. You're gonna get to choose a 1-cost card. And 1-cost cards are good. It's part of the reason why you don't see that many more of them in decks is because they take up card slots. Like I was saying before with Belcher and with Sen'jin plus Goldshire. The Goldshire is just like a lot better because you didn't have to actually use a card for it. So this card is a little bit similar. You still have to pay the mana for the 1 cost, but you get to choose what it is, or you get to choose from a few, and then you get to like fill out your curve with it, right? So you can compare it to like Razorfin Hunter, where Razorfin is a 2/3 that gives you a Wisp, which is a 0-cost card. So you're getting a better Boar for a little bit weaker Peddler, but you get to split it up, make your curve good, make a curve, fill out your curve. So you can play this on 2, and then on 3 you could play, you know, your other 2-drop plus the 1-cost card, which is solid. So yeah, and it's in Warlock, so you got Flame Imps and Void Walkers to choose from. And yeah, I think this is very reasonable, and it potentially strong. Might see some play. I don't think it's not broken enough to really be a 2 of ever, but it could see it play as a 1 of. Huge Toad. Compare it to Flame Juggler and Knife Juggler and even King Zealot. I don't think it's better than any of those cards. The only kind of gimmick it's got going for it is a death rattle, so like yeah, it would have been good if Undertaker was still good, and it would be good if like Feigned Death was like a thing. It's interesting because it's unlike like Flame Juggler. When you play Knife Juggler, the key to Knife Juggler and what makes it really strong is not really the face damage. Face damage is a bonus, but like you do Juggler and Leash, and you want those knives to hit the minions, you know, the majority of the time, because you clear out their minions and keep yours safe, and you get to go face. So this has a benefit of you could coin it on 1 or play it on 2 against an empty board, and then it's threatening to do that 1 damage to what they play into it, which is interesting. And then unlike Knife Juggler and Flame Juggler, it is a beast. So then, is this Death Rattle of 1 damage going to be better than King's Elec, which is like 30% of the time or whatever, like really good card draw minion, you know, get your high main or whatever? I don't think so. But it's not a bad card at all. It's a reasonable card. I just don't know if it's better than those other ones. This is not going to be better than Mad Scientist, unless somehow you're able to not run traps anymore and replace your Mad Scientist. I think traps would have to be worse. There'd have to be even more anti-trap tech for that to be a thing. And then I don't even know if Hunter deck is strong enough without the cheating of Mad Scientist, so I don't think it's quite good enough. But it's definitely interesting. It's definitely interesting for you play this, and then you can either trade off with something and then get the 1 damage onto their face, if that's what you're looking to do. Or you can trade this off first and see where the damage goes, maybe into a minion. And then, you know, you clear the minion, maybe, whatever. They try to clear your guy at their cost. So, you know, you're playing against a paladin and they run their, you know, mini bot into here. And then the 1 damage, you know, hits their, whatever, something that only has 1 health left and finishes that off. Maybe it's just a dude, but I don't know. It's definitely interesting as a death rattle. I still don't think it competes with those other cards. Elec, Juggler, and Juggler. And Flame Juggler never even was really considered in Hunter. So, yeah. This card is just bad. It's just bad. It's a Beast Tag Novice Engineer that gets you the card for the following turn. Those are the perks, but the reason you ran Novice Engineer was really for the cycling effect. It was you ran it in decks where you needed those combo pieces and whatnot, and you need to get through your deck. That's how it still sees play in very rare situations. You just put it in for that cycle, for that, you know, 2 mana, draw a card, get something that you can use on the board type of deal. Whereas this doesn't come from your deck, so you're not cycling for anything. So, yeah, it's just bad. Like, yeah, sometimes it'll be nice because you'll get a 3-drop that you didn't have a 3-drop already, but if you're in a deck that can't find its 3-drop for 3 already through, you know, consistency of deck building and mulliganing and whatnot, you're like having some problems then. So, yeah, you can't rely on this card to make your 3-drop good. And there's also no guarantee you're going to get a good 3-drop. You might just get spells, you might get crap, you might whatever. You're already playing crap on turn 2. Yeah, it's just not good. This card, on the other hand, is very similar, but I think it is playable. Difference between the 1-1 and the 1-2 is pretty substantial by itself. And general cards are typically pretty good. Like Abomination blows sometimes, sort of, maybe. Abomination isn't even that bad. It's like a small chill maw. It's like it's just not that it's not consistent enough in that it gets traded in easier. And hurts your side of the board, whatever. But a lot of death rattles are strong, and that 1-2 difference is a big difference. And it curves out into Velens then, so you then have a 3-6 potentially. And so yeah, this one I think is decent. You know, this card it's hard to judge. It's the 2/3. It's that like Stormforge Axe with 1 mana, no overload type of a deal. I think the only issue is that its 3 durability takes a long time, and you're not gonna cut Fiery in any deck that you would use this. I don't think Fiery War Axe. So can you ever get really max value out of this before you want to use Fiery anyway? I don't know. I don't think you can replace Fiery, so maybe it comes a one of in some decks that just really want that early game weapon. Maybe it's a one of in an aggro warrior list where you don't care about your own health, and you're just gonna race. So you're gonna pay 1 mana for 6 damage and do a fireball, and you're just gonna make yourself more consistent with weapons, I guess. But there's still that issue of you're not gonna be done swinging with this weapon until 3, and then you can't swing with a new weapon on 3 because you've already attacked, so you can't swing with another weapon until 4. So you don't have any time to use Fiery before you're into Deathbite range. So I still don't think it's even good there either. If Warrior ever gets kind of like a Deadly Poison type effect, like maybe this is really strong because of the 3 durability. Maybe you could try to use it with that Inspired 3-drop. I don't think so, though. That's kind of ridiculous. That's just going to take way too long to be a thing. That's only plus attack to your weapon, I think, that Warrior has, other than Upgrade. But Upgrade ups the durability, too, which means you're going to be taking double damage longer. So, yeah, maybe it's a one of in a couple decks. Could never be a 2 of. Never be a 2 of. Yeah. This card, I don't think it's good. It's like a weird tracking for Druid. But tracking I only ever saw play because it was getting you that cycle, getting you that combo pieces. It let you find, Buzzard Unleash. This card doesn't let you look into your deck for combos. It lets you pray that you get something useful out of everything. Granted, you get to choose between minion and spells, so at least you get half of everything versus, all of everything. But yeah, it's just not gonna be good. This card I think is gonna be good, and unfortunately I think it might see at least a one of. It won't be a 2 of, so I think I'll see a 1 of in Secret Paladin, and I think it will find its way into some mid-range Paladin list too. Because since it's play instead of a summon, you're never gonna kill like garbage like Unleash the Hounds or whatever. And yeah, sometimes you're gonna kill a 1-drop. But you only pay 1 mana. So is that a problem really? No, it's not. Like the only really bad case is killing something like Nerubian Egg. That would be bad. But there'll be times where they either have to play around it and limit themselves to 3 minions, which is kind of a big deal. Especially if they're more aggressive or mid-range and they need to put the pressure on. So limiting their minions or just catching something valuable every once in a while might just win you the game, If they're forced to play their 4th minion and it's, you're a mid-range paladin, they're playing Secret Paladin, they get their turn 6 and they want to play Mysterious Challenger, but they've already got 3 little muster for battle guys that you you could have like purposely not even killed. They either have to miss their turn 6 or trade awkwardly or play something else to avoid this card. That's a big deal for 1 mana investment. It's very, very low risk with potentially very, very high reward. I think this card will see play. This card is undervalued by a lot of people. If you ever think about like playing a abusive sergeant on turn 1 as like a hunter, like you make that play if you don't have another 1-drop, because the 2/1 on 1 versus nothing on 1 is so strong. It's a very worse. They have to ping it off and lose tempo. And if you're playing this like very tempo, very aggressive rogue list, you don't really care if they lose that tempo by pinging. You like that. And it threatens to trade with anything, including like a zombie chow. So this is like a 2/1 that zombie chow can't clear and kill something else. And it's just very solid. It's like Patient Assassin is not good because you can't really use it properly, right? This you just play as like a 1-mana 2/1, a Murloc Raider, whatever. An abusive sergeant on 1 that you didn't get to use the battle cry, and use it as a 2/1 to like go face, be aggressive, and then threaten them to play anything that they don't want this to kill. You play this on 1, and the the druid wanted to innervate coin their I guess Shredder, whatever. That is not Shredder's not that end of the world, but maybe they wanted to double innervate Druid the Claw. That's out of the question now. So they're gonna have to lose their tempo by pinging you, and like I said, it kills Chow, and it kills anything. It kills the mana worm, whatever. It's just you play this, you plan to be an aggressive rogue and go face and win the game early and threaten any of their high health minions. Like, imagine this card like against Dragon Priest. If they're not running Shadow Pain, sorry. You play this on 1, it's totally fine as a 2/1. Like, Patient Assassin, yeah, it's got the stealth to get more value out of its destroy any minion damage by its minion. But it's a 2-mana 1/1, which is like just not good. It's not playable. But as a 1-mana 2/1, it's like okay. Like I said, a ping is okay in this day and age where tempo is so important. Costing a ping. If you play against Dragon Priest, it's killing their Northshire, it's killing their Twilight Whelp, it's killing their Wormrest Agent, it's killing their Death Lord if they're running it. Or it's at least threatening that they can't play it. I think this card is undervalued. The only thing really to know is that it can't fit in a current rogue oil list. So it needs an aggro tempo list for it to be any good. But I think as long as that list comes about, maybe it's not this expansion, but when it does, as long as this doesn't get like power creeped by some other awesome rogue one, I think this card will see play. This card, I don't think it ever can compete with Sea Giant. Like, it has the benefit of you can play it as a 1-mana 1/1 if you have to, but if you have 6 other minions, your opponent probably has 1 or 2 or something, and then Sea Giant's very similar cost for an 8/8 instead of a 5/5. And this card is no good, I don't think. This card is really good, especially in Murloc Shaman. The biggest thing holding Murloc Shaman back, honestly, is the hero power. The hero power is not good. Like, the classes you would consider really for Murlocs are Warlock and Hunter with those hero powers that can close out the game, or problem, like I started talking about earlier, the biggest drawback to Murlocs is closing out the game, which you remedy either with card draw or with finisher, which you get either through like steady shot or life tap. And then even the ones that ping, as long as it's not priest or warrior or even like paladin, which that would be the worst case scenarios to get those three. But even paladin's probably at least as good as shaman. Shaman in a warlock based deck. As long as you get one of the other ones, it's like value. And on top of that, it's a 1-mana 1/3, which is like reasonable stats, especially as a murloc when murlocs are usually understated for their cost. Like Murloc Raider is a 1-mana 2/1. I think that even saw play as like a 1-of in some of the old Warlock discs before, good cards were released. So you play as in Murloc Shaman, you switch to a better hero power, ideally, and it's just as good as a 1/3 with synergy with Murloc stuff, and it's just good. I don't know if there's another class that's gonna want it, but Murloc Shaman is just good. This card's good too. It's not gonna be a Murloc Shaman; it'll be another Shaman. It's the mana worm for Shaman. It's never gonna get as crazy as mana worm because you can't just spam overload stuff like you could spam spells in a way. So it's not gonna be as gimmicky, wins you games like mana worm ever. But Shaman really wants 1-drops because of Flame Tongue and whatnot. So having a good 1-mana 1/3 is really nice. Especially, that's why Zombie Chow kind of became so core in Shaman, and Argent Squire was so core before Chow existed. And if you go Tunnel Trog, Totem Golem, that's really strong, obviously. And having that ability to have that sturdy 1-drop curve into Flame Tongue, and then also not be dead late game to where you can't play it because you can't afford to heal them 5, I think is really important, especially in a class like Shaman where you want to maybe finish them with rock batter finishers with Doomhammer or Alakir, and you don't want to risk having a dead draw later. I think this card is very, very possibly going to make it in instead of Chow. And this card I think is definitely gonna, if Murloc Shaman especially and other Murloc lists become a thing, which I think the only Murloc deck that might become a thing is Shaman, because like I said, the Paladin spell I think is better in not Paladin Murloc, and then the Shaman spell is good in Shaman Murloc and really pretty good. So I think that's the only Murloc deck that could possibly become viable in a sense, which is, I'll admit, is a stretch that it's viable. But ladder strong, decent enough, playable, is a better hope and is a reasonable hope, I think. And I think this card will be good. This card, you can play it on 3. You can play it first and then play the guy that buffs health, and that's just really nice having it be 0 mana. You could try to make a Hobgoblin Murloc deck with this. I don't think so, because I guess you got Grimscale Oracle and the one that's the 1/2 that grows, which would be good. But I don't think that'll work. But like I was talking about earlier, it's like a coin for the reduce the cost of this for every Murloc. And they already have that Murloc that's like the Cult Master, which gives card draw for running guys in. So that kind of combats the issue with a 0 mana 1/1, is that you lost a card for not much value. So then if you use this alongside the guy that draws cards when the Murlocs die, that combo is kind of that downside. And I think it just fits really well in that deck. So that's it, guys, for all of the cards for this card review. Hope you enjoy. Thank you for taking the time to watch it. This took a while, as I'm now noticing. Yeah, I just wanted to get my thoughts down and out there, and have a good one and take care.